Miami gets Damien Martinez, and they should be a playoff contender now.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Portal, realignment, the coaching carousel, we've got all that and more every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Alex Donno of Locked On Canes joining me here because this Miami situation is heating up in the spring transfer portal window, and they just landed maybe the biggest name that was available. I've talked about him before, Damien Martinez, the transfer from Oregon State, over 1,100 yards rushing last year in Corvallis. He goes down to Coral Gables and is set to join Cam Ward and create what I think is one of the better backfields in college football. If you're talking quarterback one, running back one, I think running back tandem, you look at Ohio State, but they're not a lot better than Cam Ward and Damien Martinez. And when you have guys that are that talented and you've clearly invested the amount of money required to get those guys there, Alex, I think that makes you look at Miami and say, whether you're a fan or somebody not affiliated with the program, I think you have to look at Miami and say you should at least be pushing for a college football playoff spot with this all-in approach, and it's Mario Cristobal's third year.
Yeah, and I believe that's the mentality that Miami has from Mario Cristobal all throughout his staff is, and I think that mentality, it was reinforced by how much they really liked what Cam Ward did in spring. I think we did talk about this a little bit the last time I joined you, but they obviously knew that they were going after when they were pursuing Ward, someone who could elevate the quarterback room. But I don't think they realized until they actually saw him working in the facility just how good he can be at Miami. And then I think that's where that all-in approach was really born, that Mario Cristobal and company thought, okay, we've got Ward here for one season and one season only. We need to try to surround him with the best possible talent. And they're certainly doing that in the form of Damien Martinez. I mean, you know him, of course, probably better than most, having covered the Pac-12 the way that you did. This is someone who not only rushed for 1,185 yards and 9 touchdowns last year. I think what Miami really loves about Martinez is how strong and powerful he is in generating yards after contact. I mean, out of those almost 1,200 yards that he recorded last season, Spencer, 744 of those came after contact, so more than half of those. And he averaged 3.8 yards per carry after contact. And overall, he averaged 6.1 yards per carry each of the last 2 seasons, which is excellent. And he really fits that Mario Cristobal running style. And, why? And you talked earlier about running back tandems. Miami is maybe hoping they could have something like that. But one of their other running backs is a little bit of an injury question mark right now. And I think that's why they were so aggressive in adding Damien Martinez, because Miami has another big back on the roster who has sort of a similar mold, hasn't proven what Martinez has proven on the field. But Mark Fletcher, who had a good true freshman season last year, he's 6'3", 225 pounds. But Fletcher suffered a tricky foot injury, a Liz Frank injury, in the bowl game back in December. And so I think there is some question as to whether or not Fletcher would be ready to start the season, or even if he'd be ready at any point during the season. So I think the goal would be, if Fletcher can be back healthy at some point, if not to start the season, you could have a pretty incredible tandem between Damien Martinez and Mark Fletcher. Fletcher, like, they're hoping he can become a back that Martinez already is. But even if Fletcher's not ready to go, Martinez obviously packs a really powerful punch in that backfield. And I know Miami worked very, very hard to bring him there, and they have to be thrilled that he offered that commitment.
Cristobal wants to build his team on physicality. He's an offensive lineman. That's in his DNA. He wants his teams to look the way Michigan did this past year, where they are just more physical. Washington just had a first-round quarterback, a first-round receiver, and 2 more receivers selected in the next couple of rounds. And Michigan beat them 34-13. How? They ran the ball 304-43. They outgained Washington on the ground by that margin. That's what Mario Cristobal wants as well. And I think Damien Martinez stylistically fits that mold for Cristobal, because he is a physical downhill runner.
Yeah, there's no question about it, and I think that with the way that it's going to complement Cam Ward, I know that there's only one football, and obviously Miami feels like they have a very dynamic quarterback, and they've got some good weapons in the receiving core, but when you have an option like that in Damien Martinez, he's going to open up so much more for the passing game, and then the opposite can also be true. If Ward is on a roll, that's going to open up running lanes. So it's kind of a pick your poison situation for opposing defenses, whether to stack the box or not. I think that's a luxury that Miami is hoping for. And so, if I look at the big picture, if I zoom out a little bit with Miami, Spencer, they're definitely, and all of this is on paper, of course, but they're definitely on paper assembling an offense that looks like it can compete with anyone in the ACC. I think the defense is a little bit more of a question mark right now, and I know we're about to talk about a couple of defensive additions Miami made, but I still think there's kind of an important piece to the puzzle there in the form of a defensive tackle. I think they need another one. They have two visiting starting today, actually. Two guys from Michigan State, Simeon Barrow and Derek Harmon, are both visiting. I think Miami's going to try to pitch the idea of them playing together in Miami. Do I expect them to land both? No. Maybe I think Harmon is the guy that they consider to be the one with the most upside, so he might be maybe the preferred target. I think they would be very happy to land either one, and if they don't, you got to hope that some of the younger guys that they have can develop to complement a couple of the veterans. But I definitely think that there are some pieces that still need to be put together on Miami's defense, but offensively, just on that side of the football, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to compete with the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world. It's just a matter of putting all that talent together.
Well, one piece that has been filled on the defensive side is Jaylin Alderman coming over from Louisville after last season. And look, it's not the last move Miami's expected to make in the transfer portal, but certainly it's one in addition to a corner they just landed. The spring transfer portal window has been good to the Hurricanes.
Yeah, in terms of Alderman, it's a nice addition for Miami. I don't know whether or not he's going to be a starter at Miami. Their formation has two linebackers. One of those, Kiko Mauinoa, who I'm sure you also remember. He's got a starting job locked down. Maybe Alderman can compete for the other one. But even if he becomes a depth piece, this is a guy who's experienced. Alderman started all 13 games for Louisville and had a pretty good season last year. And Louisville's defense actually was higher ranked overall than Miami. So
really good unit last year.
If you take a starter from that defense, you figure he can at least compete to start in Miami. But I think the most important thing about that Alderman addition is the history that he has with Miami linebackers coach. Derek Nicholson, D-Nick as they call him, was the linebackers coach previously at Louisville. I believe he was the primary recruiter for Alderman when he committed there a few years ago. So he and D-Nick have that history. So, they already have that relationship, and Alderman knows exactly what to expect from his linebackers coach.
And then they've just added a corner from Marshall as well, also with ties to the coaching staff. How big of an impact is that?
We'll see. Cornerback is an area where we need to see someone else emerge. Daryl Porter Jr. has got a starting job locked down. Really beyond that, there's a competition. Miami's got some young corners who had pretty good springs. Damari Brown is heading into his second season. He was good in spells late last year as a true freshman. He started to come on. Jadis Richard is a corner who's a former Vanderbilt transfer from a couple of years ago who's had a pretty good spring. But I don't see why Diani Hill can't be in that mix. And you talked about the Miami ties for him. He had a very good season at Marshall last year. He actually started out as a rotational guy, but he ended up becoming a regular starter, started their final 9 games of the season last year, graded out pretty well in all areas. He's actually very good tackler, very good against the run. But he's another one with the relationships because his former cornerbacks coach, as recently as last year, Chavis Jackson, is now the cornerbacks coach at Miami. His former defensive coordinator from 2 seasons ago, 2022, Lance Guidry, who's Miami's defensive coordinator. So this is another player that 2 of his coaches on that side of the football know exactly what to expect from that guy and vice versa. So the transition should be an easy one for him.
A good spring transfer portal window for Miami, and a good segment as always with Alex Donno, Locked on Canes on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Alex, thanks as always.
Spencer, it's always my pleasure. Thank you.
Does Nebraska have a quarterback problem? All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. It bears repeating. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together, build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends. Everything you want. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, not just the same old, same old. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Does Nebraska have a quarterback problem? The answer is unequivocally no. They have the opposite of a quarterback problem. They have a quarterback solution. I apologize for being facetious, but I just wanted to underscore how impressed I was with Dylan Raiola in Nebraska's spring game. Craig Shemon, Locked On Big Ten. I don't know what more Raiola could have done. He did throw an interception in this game that went right off his receiver's hands, of course, but he had 6 incompletions, but he ended the game with 239 yards on 16 completions with 2 touchdowns. Boy, I thought he looked really good, Craig, and I don't know how he doesn't start week 1.
So it's great you mentioned this because Friday's Locked On Big Ten podcast was, do you start him or do you ease him in a little bit? Because I was a little bit surprised throughout the spring, all the reports I was hearing. I was like, nobody starts a true freshman in Power 5 football. Ohio State's doing the same thing, right? They got 2 5-stars. They're not going to start over there. You ease guys like that in. But the fact that he's at Nebraska and they've got to take that next step and get that bowl win, but then to do it with a freshman quarterback, who knows? So we discussed this on Friday, and we're breaking down the schedule on the podcast. It's like, all right, do you let him go week 1 at UTEP? The following week you got Colorado. And then, that's the Dion show and all that stuff. Maybe Northern Iowa. You got a bye week later on. You can ease them in Bloomington. Forget all that. Week 1, this guy's got to start. I was watching it on delay Sunday morning on the repeat on Big Ten Network, and I'm like, this guy looks like he's been there for 4 years. He looks so comfortable going back to throw, and like the game's in slow motion for him. And I know you mentioned the interception. Yeah, it hit the receiver in both hands. It was a little behind him, but it hit both of his hands. He was going back and forth between the first string and the second string. He was playing for both teams, and I think he hit 13 different receivers or something crazy like that. There's no reason not to start this guy. And even if he looks like a freshman and makes mistakes, doesn't matter. This is the best quarterback they have on Matt Rule's team. Start him.
Yeah, I agree. And Heinrich Harburg had some really nice moments in this game, made some nice throws. I just think you saw what he was a season ago for Nebraska, and this was a passing game that was dreadful. There is just no other way to put it. Of the 3 quarterbacks that saw the field, none of them averaged 100 passing yards per game in their time. It was Jeff Sims, hybrid. Like it just wasn't a good situation. So I don't see the downside of Raiola starting the season on the bench. UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa. Look, that should be at least 2 wins. And by the way, if you win all 3 of those games, is everybody ready for Nebraska football to be ranked inside the top 25? Because they will absolutely get that sort of consideration. When you play Colorado, you're going to get a lot of eyeballs. You're going to get a lot of attention. You have that game at home in Lincoln. So if you win that game, and then you're 3-0, I think they would at least get top 25 votes, depending on how those games really go down. But I see no upside to having Raiola sit. I mean, I completely agree with what you said about how poised he looked.
Yeah.
He did not look like someone who'd never taken the field in a college football game before. Yeah, it'd be his first start against UTEP, but I think that's easing into it about as much as you can, barring an FCS opponent. Yeah. I thought he was just utterly fantastic.
This is a good football team. I'll tell you what, it was a good football team last year. They just didn't have the right quarterback. You mentioned Jeff Sims and Harburg and the Chubba Purdy and the Brock Purdy's brothers out there. and they were all turnover machines. And, they continued the Scott Frost scenario where they just kept losing close games, one turnover here, one score there, and they're winning these games. It's kind of a loser's mentality to go back and look at it. If, what, but, however, that kind of stuff. They need to win those games. They need to take the next step. This fan base is so desperate to become bowl eligible. And I mean desperate in a good way. They are just charged and just chomping at the bit for it. And if they get the right quarterback in there, they can win those couple extra games and get bowl eligible. They were on their way last year, and they just cratered at the end of the season. And another thing I noticed when I was watching them, last year, you mentioned the passing numbers for the quarterbacks. That offense was old school Tom Osborne offense. I was a little surprised Matt Rule went that way when he brought Jeff Sims in from Georgia Tech to be their quarterback. It was like a lot of option football where the main option was for the quarterback to be the leading rusher. You can't do that in this day and age anymore. It's too risky for one. So frequently Sims and Harbaugh would have 100, 150 yards rushing and be the leading rusher of the day for this team. And I didn't see any of that in their offense. Now this was more just go back in the pocket and throw the ball downfield. And so they may say, hey, we really didn't change the offense. They've changed the offense because Raiola is not like an option run guy.
He's not
going to throw that football.
Yeah, and that's what he does so well. Like he had long completions, he had touch throws, RPO game, poise, making good reads. I just felt he didn't throw the ball sometimes. This is one of my favorite things to see from a young quarterback is if nothing is there, are you able to just live to see another down? If you're on a sprint out right and you've got two options and they're taken away, do you just throw it away or are you trying to force the ball into a window? I thought his poise and moxie was just tremendous. But you mentioned the ground game. They brought in a transfer this offseason that kind of flew under the radar. Dante Dowdell, the running back from Oregon, is someone that can make an impact. He spent 1 year with the Ducks, was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. This is a physical, explosive runner in the backfield. And if you incorporate a more traditional run game to complement Raiola, like this was a defensively led team that still almost made a bowl game. They were 5-7 last year, and they were Iowa levels of bad at times throwing the football. Like that's where they were. I haven't compared the numbers, but gosh almighty, they might have been close. So I don't think Raiola even has to be the perfect quarterback, or he doesn't have to hit his ceiling right away, Craig. If he just goes out and can throw for literally 220 to 250 yards a game, couple touchdowns, no more than 1 or 2 interceptions, I have a hard time seeing Nebraska going under their preseason win total of 7.5.
Yeah, I like the bet on the over on the win total. And you're right there. I mean, their problem, they were one of the worst turnover teams in the country last year, and most of it came from their quarterback position and interceptions and fumbles. They just button that up, and you just give, Raiola, like you said, Raiola doesn't have to be great. He can even have his typical freshman games. He's going to probably be up and down. May have some bad games mixed in there, but I absolutely think they can get 1 or 2 more wins than they did last year with this football team. Like I said, they were a good team last year. They just didn't have the right quarterback. I think they got the right quarterback. Let's grow with him, and he's going to be there for a minimum of 3 years. So I think some good things can happen for Matt Rule in Nebraska and the fan base, which is really, really wanting to see this happen.
And they're one of the best fan bases in college football. I mean, you look at their attendance numbers, and they support all Nebraska sports, great support for the basketball team, the volleyball team, like everything. And they've just been starving to just be good. And you also make a good point that this is going to be year 1 for Raiola, and you let him start. I think that lowers the likelihood that he could, seek options in the transfer portal in the offseason if the season were to go well. But if you go win 7-8 games with him, you're going into next year as a Big Ten contender. At least that'll be the expectation. I don't have that expectation this year for Nebraska with a true freshman quarterback, but I even just look at the Big Ten quarterback landscape. It's not very impressive. I think Raiola could be one of the 4 or 5 best in the league.
You make a great point. I was comparing quarterbacks last week on a podcast, and I'm like, who is the best quarterback in the Big Ten?
It's probably Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, it's Dylan. That's actually, I had Dylan Gabriel 1. I had Luke Altmaier, I think, at Illinois 2. And I wouldn't have said that last year. Drew Aller's going backwards. Michigan doesn't know what they're doing. Will Howard, I'm not a fan of. He's not a very accurate passer.
Well, I like Howard, but Ohio State doesn't seem to be in love with Will Howard. They don't know if he's a starting quarterback right now. Well, he probably is.
They're going to want a quarterback to complete more than 60% of his passes, and he's like a 59% guy. And I say 60% lightheartedly. They're going to want more than that. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to rue the day they ran Kyle McCord out of town is what's going to happen.
You think so? You think he's popping at Syracuse this year?
Well, first of all, Syracuse has a brutally easy schedule. I think he's going to throw up some numbers. I didn't think Kyle McCord was that bad last year. I think he threw one bad pass in the fourth quarter against Michigan. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten rid of him. I think he's better than anybody right now that they have on the roster. I want to see these 2 5-stars, Aaron Nolan and Julian Sayin, how they do and how they develop. But compare those 2 5-stars at Ohio State compared to the 5-star work with Dylan Raiola. Raiola's starting. Those guys at Ohio State aren't going to see much of the football field. At least both of them won't. Maybe one of them does a little bit, but they're so far in that depth chart over there. I don't know what the plan is at Ohio State as of today.
Yeah, I'm surprised that none of those guys have hit the transfer portal as we record this show. And the portal, the last day to enter is tomorrow, Tuesday, April 30th. So definitely fascinating to see if any guy does hit there or if they just have 5 starting caliber or at least capable quarterbacks in 2024. But we know Nebraska's got one in Dylan Raiola.
Absolutely. And just one more thought on Ohio State. I think either Nolan or Sayin, one of the two will transfer at some point. If not this year, probably next year. There's just not enough footballs for these guys.
I think that's a reasonable prediction there. Craig Shemon, Locked On Big Ten. Craig, thanks for stopping by.
You bet. I always enjoy it, Spencer.
Do you know where the best running back room in the Big 12 is? I do. First, let's get to our friends at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. You don't actually have to be right. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, it is, which is why you should go check it out, because you can bet on everything from slap shots to home run to slam dunks. And by the way, you can bet college football games, Heisman odds, national championship winners, win totals, conference champions. Everything you could possibly want is over there thanks to FanDuel. All in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So, ask yourself this question. What are you waiting for? I don't know either. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. So Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, of which I'm a big fan myself. Go Mariners, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, and they've got all sorts of great deals. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals. Game Time is just the place to be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Who doesn't love some good portal chatter? I do. Here's a move that you should be aware of. Dylan Edwards is going to Kansas State. So Edwards was a 4-star recruit, one of the crown jewels from the high school ranks for that 2023 class for Coach Prime and company, and he hit the transfer portal, and he's going to Kansas State. And they now have the best backfield in the entire Big 12. Because DJ Giddens, who ran for, how many yards do you think he ran for last year? How many? Ask yourself that question. The answer is over 1,200 yards. So, you know you've got one running back who's good. You bring in Dylan Edwards, who was going to play a little bit more wide receiver at Colorado this year if he had stuck around. So you now bring in a versatile weapon, but a guy who can be in the backfield for you as well and has got explosive breakaway speed. I don't see a backfield in the Big 12 that is better than these two guys. Where else can you say You have someone with a ton of untapped potential, well, minorly tapped into potential, and a 1,200-yard rusher. And oh, by the way, this is not just the best backfield. This might be the best overall rushing attack in the Big 12 and one of the best in the country. Kansas State is the number 2 favorite, according to our friends at FanDuel, behind Utah to win the Big 12. And this backfield's a big reason why. Remember, Avery Johnson, who took over for Will Howard kind of at the end of last year as they phased him out, he ran for almost 300 yards in Wildcat duty. What's he going to do as a starting quarterback? He's probably going to run for a lot of yards. And remember, when Kansas State won the Big 12 a couple of years ago, beat TCU, who played in the national championship game. Now, let me think. Who was on that team? Oh, yeah, this guy named Deuce Vaughn. Chris Kleiman wants to run the football, and he has got the most dynamic, explosive, and versatile backfield that he has had during his time in Lawrence. So that is the best backfield in the Big 12. Really, really good pickup there by the Wildcats to get Dylan Edwards, to go with DJ Giddens, to pair with the legs of Avery Johnson. Kansas State, second in the Big 12 for championship odds. They are deserving of that particular title. A couple other transfers to be aware of. So USC has been known to use the transfer portal from time to time. I think they've done so with a really high level of success. Most recently on defense, they added Greedy Vance from Florida State. They've made other notable moves like Easton Mascarenas Arnold, Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey, and several others who are going to make an impact this year. But they've brought in 2 receivers here. Now, one of which is kind of hilarious, and I'll get to that in a moment. But they bring in Jay Fair from Auburn, who's played over there for the last couple of seasons, and this is someone who's going to continue solidifying the wide receiver room for USC. And if you're Miller Moss, going into your first year as a starting quarterback for the Trojans, which is the widely held expectation here, I think Jaden Mayava is good, but he's going to be the backup to Miller Moss. Will Howard didn't go to USC. He went to Ohio State. Why? Because Miller Moss was there. And Miller Moss, as is often the case with Lincoln Riley teams, is not going to be short on weapons. He's going to have an abundance of weapons. You're going to have Jay Fair. You're going to have other guys who were already on the team from last year. But did you see who returned to USC? So, you know those generic transfer portal posts that players put out? I'd like to thank God. I'd like to thank my coaches, the fans, the community, blah, blah, blah. With that said, I'll be transferring, or I'm in the transfer portal and all that sort of stuff, right? It's very cookie cutter for the most part. Well, Kyle Ford is not cookie cutter. And he went to UCLA. He's a class of 2019 recruit. 5-star according to 24/7 Sports, highly rated 4-star in the 24/7 composite. This is a guy who's played a lot of college football, has good size and immense talent, and he's going back to USC. He announced it by just saying, quote, "I was tripping," end quote. I got to give him props. I mean, that might be, I'm trying to think if there was a better one. I don't know that there is one. That might be my favorite portal announcement of all time. I cannot get enough of "I was tripping." He went to UCLA. Even though UCLA beat USC last year, USC is going to be a much better team than UCLA in 2024. I would bet that the battle for Los Angeles, that classic Big Ten showdown, is going to be USC by at least 15 to 20 points. At least, I would think. So Kyle Ford and Jay Fair are joining the Trojans wide receiver room, solidifying once again after they had guys depart via the portal and off to the NFL draft. Lincoln Riley's going to have weapons. They're not going to be lacking on that front. And look, they lost a number of guys from last year. Dorian Singer went to USC. Michael Jackson III, he's not in that room anymore. Or was it Taj Washington? One of the two. Remember, so many players in the transfer portal and whatnot. But you have Brendan Rice off to the NFL, Dorian Singer at Utah. Like, you had a lot of guys go out of that room, but now they've brought guys into that room. USC is going to be just fine. They're going to have the weapons. It's going to come down, I think, to Miller Moss and the offensive line as well, which was sneaky kind of bad last year for the Trojans. So watch for that to see if it's improved. But certainly, they're not going to be lacking for weapons, and I trust Lincoln Riley to score a lot of points. Here's the name to keep your eye on. Sam Brown. So Sam Brown is someone who I've mentioned on the show before, wide receiver from Houston, guy who the Cougars were not happy to see go. We're actually lamenting that he left because Sam Brown is someone who can be not necessarily a number one, but certainly a viable weapon. And who are we talking about earlier in today's show? That's right, we were talking about Miami, the Miami Hurricanes, and the offense that they have. And yeah, maybe they need a couple more pieces, though they've been adding them, as we also discussed on defense as well. But Cam Ward, Damien Martinez, you got guys like Xavier Restrepo on the outside for the Hurricanes. Sam Brown is reportedly going to commit to Miami. Now, this has not been made official yet, so you can't celebrate it just yet, Hurricane fans. What you can do is say, hey, if we go get one of the top wide receivers in the transfer portal right now, how are we not looking to make a push for the college football playoff? Because when you have brought in all the talent, like Cam Ward was one of the top quarterbacks available. Damien Martinez, probably the best running back that has changed teams. Sam Brown, one of the top receiver options currently in the transfer portal in this spring window. I just wonder, I just wonder at what point do Miami fans look at the guys they've brought in? It's year 3 for Mario Cristobal. At what point do you just go, oh, you should be contending for an ACC title and a college football playoff spot? That doesn't mean if you don't win the ACC or if you don't make the playoff, it's a failure of a season. But they should be in the running. If you come up just short a game late at the end of the year, that's one thing. But when you've put this much into the team, both financially and the caliber of guys that you've invested with those finances, I think expectations should be pretty high. And if they go get Sam Brown, it's just going to be another weapon for Cam Ward to have at his disposal. And that offense, with a Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal coached offensive line, could be one of the best in the ACC. And I wouldn't be surprised if they can be a better team than Clemson if they're able to put it all together. But that does not mean I'm down on the Tigers. It just means I think Miami is doing a lot of really, really good things. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.